Our second lesson is from the Gospel of Mark, from the opening chapter, beginning at the 32nd verse. Jesus has been traveling through Galilee, proclaiming the message of God's salvation and healing the people who are sick. He has just healed Peter's mother-in-law, and now the crowds are beginning to gather around him. Listen now to God's word. That evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons. And he would not permit the demons to speak, because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. And when they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." And Jesus answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also, for that is what I came to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of the Lord. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. That's a pretty harsh statement. In fact, it's a shocking statement. But I believe Socrates put it just that way in order to awaken us from our slumbers, to awaken us from our labors, to awaken us from our slumbering labors. So that we might step back from ourselves and look at ourselves apart from what we do, so that we might take time in the busyness of our lives to contemplate, if only for a moment, the meaning of our lives. But who has the time? When we're working all the time, we do not take time to rest or to be renewed. When we're trapped by our labors or lost in our pleasures, we lose sight of who we really are in the eyes of God. The Jewish faith gave us the gift of Sabbath time for this very purpose, so that we might be defined not solely by what we do. The Sabbath rest takes us for a time apart. And in that time apart, we remove ourselves from the center of the universe, where we like to place ourselves, and we allow God to be where God is. For one goal of the Sabbath rest is to rest from our labors, so that we might allow time and space for God to work in us. And yet the crush and the power of life, the pace of our daily existence, makes it very hard for most of us to simply keep Sabbath. Well, we're not the first to lose perspective. We're not going to be the last. The Bible is full of stories of people who are consumed with other things than God. The prophet Isaiah spoke the words we heard read this morning to the children of Israel, the people who were in exile in Babylon. Year fed into year, years passed, hope began to die. Many felt that they would never return home, that they had been abandoned by God, that even when they offered their prayers to God, that God did not hear them pray, lost in a land far from home. We heard in those words the cry of the people going up to God. My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God. Even when they prayed, they thought that God was silent. God was unresponsive. Prayers going unanswered, and there they were in exile, left to the drudgery of daily living, day upon day, month upon month, year upon year. Lost in the crush of their lives. But it was the prophet Isaiah who was able to take a step back from their situation. He paused long enough to look at the human condition, to human life from God's perspective. And Isaiah, surveying the landscape of human life, he saw how the great distance between God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, and even the rulers of the earth, what a great distance there was. And the rulers of the earth, from our perspective, whose power seemed so absolute, whose kingdom seemed so without end, were like in the eyes of God stalks of grain, blown about by the wind, shriveled by the sun, uprooted by the tempest. It is only those who take time to step back from the fray that they can see the truth of God. Only those who take time to contemplate God's way will discover that way. Oh, but it's hard, isn't it? Hard, isn't it, to just simply press the pause button when we have so many demands upon our time. We put down our smartphones for an hour and we find just in that hour when we pick it up again, 30 new emails. Or if you're in a younger generation, how many texts or tweets? You know, is it worth even putting down? It seems like we're never out of reach of technology's intrusive hand. Sometimes I find myself longing for the day when I was a child and those long summer days and we could simply, Mom, we're leaving the house, and we'd go out, ride our bikes all over the neighborhood, get together with friends, play games, have a good time, and in that hot sun, just simply exhausted, sit in the shade of a giant tree and fall into reverie, only to be awakened by the dinner bell and the call of our name calling us back to another time, a time to go home. When was the last time you took a day off? I mean, really. I mean, turned off the computer, put down your smartphone, didn't answer the telephone, turned off the TV. I know you'd have to go to withdrawal clinic, but when was the last time you simply took the whole day off and went for a walk with a friend, enjoyed your child, didn't do anything, so that when somebody says, hey, what'd you do yesterday? You could honestly answer for the first time, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And wasn't it sweet? In a blog post entitled The Disease of Being Busy, Professor Ahmed Safi, who is the director of Islamic Studies at Duke University, wrote these things. Whatever happened to a world in which kids get muddy, get dirty, get messy, and heavens get bored? Do we have to love our children so much that we overschedule them, making them as stressed out as we are, just like us? What happened to a world in which we can sit with people we love so much and have slow conversations about the state of our heart and soul, conversations that slowly unfold, conversations with pregnant pauses and silences that we are in no rush to fill? How did we create a world in which we have more and more and more to do with less time for leisure, less time for reflection, less time for community, less time just to be? How did Jesus find such a time? Mark tells us about a day early in the ministry of Jesus, a day in the life of Jesus, which I suspect was all too common, a day that was all too busy, a day that did not end at sundown. It had already been a full day with folks from all over Galilee bringing the sick, the troubled, the mentally ill to him. And now at sundown, they were still crowded around the house, more and more people needing more and more things. The sun had gone down, but the work had not stopped. Late into the evening, way into the dark, he worked. And then he slept. And Mark tells us that before dawn, he got up early in the dark and he slipped away. Jesus, who had the weight of the world on his shoulders, took time to be apart, to rest, to pray, to be alone with God. It didn't just happen. He drew apart to make room for quiet. He found a deserted place to be with God. And when the disciples found him, he was ready to be with them again, to re-enter the fray, to go about his mission, his work, his ministry. Mark gives us this one brief moment when Jesus stands apart from the fray to be refreshed, renewed, and strengthened. His moment reminds me of the words of the prophet Isaiah to the people in exile. They who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall rise up like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. For God gives to the weary uncommon power. God gives to the waiting divine strength. I have a confession to make. Now everybody's ears perk up. I am an off-the-charts extreme extrovert. Now that may not be a surprise to some of you. But most of my own personal experiences of God happen in the company of others, happen in the busyness of life, happen when we get together for a ministry or a mission project, happen in conversations with other people. I have a really hard time stepping apart and being quiet. Former associate pastor told me that when Lewis is at a presbytery meeting and there's a nanoseconds of silence, he thinks he has to fill it. Well, this is who I am. I've learned that about myself. You know, I used to like 15 minutes of quiet time once a year. And now I find I like it, I need it, I want it every day. As I have hopefully matured, I've learned there needs to be more balance in my spiritual life and growth. I need time to pray alone. I need time to read, to meditate, to think, to ponder. I need that day of absolutely nothing. These things have become increasingly important to me. And so I ask you, where in your life do you begin to find this time apart, this quiet time with God? Well, I say let it begin in worship. Long before I became a pastor, my favorite moment in worship was the organ prelude. Let me tell you why. Because for me, it was the time to simply sit down, to let go of my activities, to drop those thoughts that crowd my confused mind. It was time to sit down, to be at peace, and to let the Spirit begin the Spirit's work in me. Our chapel organist, Dale Caldwell, shared with me these words that were written 150 years ago by guess who? Henry Ward Beecher. In an essay our former pastor wrote on the organ prelude, he wrote these words: "When the people enter the house of God upon the Sabbath, they come from care, from business, from secular pleasures, from duties. And two things are needed at the beginning of public worship, and these are, first, a transition from ordinary thought and feeling to a higher and more devout frame of mind, and second, a unity of spirit, a fellowship in the whole assembly." Now, Beecher writes, it is in the power of music to arrest the attention, to change the current of feeling, to draw off the thoughts from common things, and to give the mind a higher state than before. This, then, is the object of the prelude. Upon entering the house of God, there is, as it were, a screen of sound rolled down between the audience and the outward world. I may get tarred and feathered for saying this, But I think we should put a sign at the doors of the sanctuary that say, "Quiet, please. The Spirit at work." And so it is in our worship, that we take a moment apart together to be with God. Of course, this is only the beginning, and we need moments apart by ourselves to be with God. And each one of us finds our own way to let go of those outward cares and concerns, this busy world that is with us, the crush of life, the trivial distractions that wear us down and draw us away from God. And for you, it may be the way of prayer, of daily meditation. For another, a reunion group, a Bible study, a walk in nature, a conversation with a friend, simply being with a guest in our food pantry, or going on a retreat. But it is in all these ways that we cease our ordinary labors, the clamor of the world, and we open our hearts, our minds, our souls to the Spirit's extraordinary work of transformation in us. Amen.